What is up, fight nerds and dirty gamblers? I am Eric, and this is Eric Bets Fights. Welcome back, everybody. It's break week. We're almost through it. We're gonna get through it, folks. Yeah, it's break week from the UFC anyway. If you're a super degen, there was some ex-MMA and some Cage Warriors to be had. Some fun fights. Even some decent names. That ex-MMA card had a bunch of former UFC fighters on there, had some name value for a smaller show. Some fun fights on that card, some fun fights on Cage Warriors, but there's nothing quite like a star-studded UFC pay-per-view like the one that we're going to be getting with UFC 273 coming up this weekend. We're going to go ahead and break down that entire card from a betting perspective, but first we're going to go ahead and give we're going to do the recap of the last event, the Fight Night event that was headlined by Curtis Blades versus Chris Daukaus. I'm not going to actually recap the entire card. I'm just going to recap the bets that I had just to kind of save a little bit of time, or this video is going to be 2 hours long. But it was a pretty good night of bets. I did, when I put out my separate UFC recap videos, one of the things that I put in the title is what did we learn? So that's kind of what I always want to focus on here is let's go through the bets. Let's talk about what went well. Let's talk about what didn't go well. Let's talk about what lessons we can take away from this to do better in the future. So we'll try to focus on that a little bit. But so one thing that I did a little bit different here is I've always kind of shied away from straight betting like chalky favorites. I have no problem parlaying big favorites. I do a lot of parlaying. In fact, that's kind of where I do my best work. I've won the most units and have the best ROI on my parlays as opposed to props and straight bets. But this time I decided, I'm going to try to pay more attention to those chalky favorite lines, and instead of just, typically if I see anything like minus 200 or above, I'm like, I'm not betting that. But I need to change my attitude a little bit and realize that, okay, slow down, look at those chalky lines. If there's value there, there's value there, so I need to take the time to do that. So I tried to do that this time around, and I tried to say like, hey, if it seems like a good bet, even though it's a big, chalky line, go ahead and do it anyway. Because as I've mentioned before, I've spent time looking through the records of the top cappers on betmma.tips, and that's one of the things I see is that they do a lot. Most of the people that have been doing this consistently and doing really well for a long time, they do bet chalky favorites, and when they're confident, they even lay down big bets. The 11 units is the most you can do. A lot of guys lay down 11 unit bets pretty regularly, so I'm trying to learn from those things. So anyway, let's take a look at those bets. My first straight bet of the night was Aleksei Grasso against Joanne Wood. I got her at minus 220. I laid down 2.2 units to win one. I was an easy casher there. I didn't see Aleksei Grasso winning by submission there, of course. I don't think she's ever won by submission, but I figured it was probably going to go to decision. I thought Grasso was just going to be, the only place that would potentially had it on her was higher volume, but I really thought Grasso was just going to be quicker, more dynamic, have better movement, hit harder. I just thought she was going to be the better fighter overall, but hey, it worked out for us really well anyway, so we picked that one up. Next, I put 2.1 units on Neil Magny over Max Griffin at minus 205, so I beat some line movement there. That one got a little sweaty at times, but Magny looked really good later in the fight. Trying to remember the details exactly. I know Magny had a really good third round. I believe Max Griffin won the first round, if I remember correctly. Second round might have been kind of close. But Magny did end up picking up the win there, so we won 1.02 units on that one. Next up, Chris Gutierrez versus Dana Garry. This was the only underdog that I bet. I put 1 unit on Gutierrez at plus 135. Honestly, the reason I bet that line is I thought this was pretty much a 50-50 fight. This was one of those spots where I probably would have bet the plus number on either guy. I did think Garry had a good shot of finding that knockout early, as he often does. I think he was coming off of 3 first-round knockouts in a row going into that fight. But I did also think that, Gutierrez has really good movement. He's pretty quick with his footwork. And I did think that there was a good chance that Gutierrez was going to be able to use his lateral movement, use his dynamism and his footwork to make it difficult for Garry to catch him with that big shot, which is pretty much how it was playing out. I thought Gutierrez would win a decision or, maybe get like that stoppage with leg kicks late in the fight. I definitely didn't expect the spinning back fist knockout. That was really cool. So yeah, good for Gutierrez, man. That guy's I don't know. I feel like he's kind of outperforming expectations a little bit. Not that people didn't think he was good, but I think he's proving to be even better than we thought he was probably. So we pick up 1.35 units there on Gutierrez. And then the biggest money line bet that I've ever made in my life, I put 8 units on Manon Fiorot I hear people say Fiaho just sounds weird to say, but I guess that's correct. Manon Fiaho over Jennifer Maia. I put 8 units down. Fiaho was at minus 380. 8 units is that's a big bet. It's the biggest bet I've ever made on a straight money line. And it was because I really, really felt confident that Fiaho was going to win this fight. I was like, it was actually ended up being a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. I mean, Fiaho won 30-27, but she didn't blow Maia out of the water. The rounds were fairly close. Jennifer Maia definitely had her moments. She hurt Fiaho with a head kick at one point. She managed to keep it fairly close, reasonably close, closer than I thought she would anyway. So it was a little bit sweatier than I would have liked, but yeah, we did pick up 2.11 units there. And see, that's why I shy away from those, because it felt so weird to be putting 8 units on the line to only win 2.11 units. But at the same time, I need to look for those spots, and if I feel confident in them and I feel like there's value there, I need to pull the trigger on those. So yeah, we had 3 chalky favorites and 1 underdog for our straight picks, and all 4 of those hit. So that was nice to see. Moving on to props and parlays, I had a parlay of Fiaho and Blades at minus 167. I put half a unit on that. That hit. I put 2 units on Matt Brown and Brian Barberena fight doesn't go the distance. I shouldn't have gone so heavy on that one, but that was I thought, like, man, minus 150. These guys both tend to be finishers. These guys are both. It's going to be a slobber knocker of a fight. Also, shout out to Manpreet from MMA Lock of the Night for pointing out that Barberena had fought. Barberena's an Ohio boy, and the event was in Ohio. Barberena had fought, or not Barberena, Brown. Sorry, Brown's an Ohio boy. Brown had fought in his home state of Ohio 9 times previous to this event, and none of them had gone to decision. And I just really thought, Brown's going to want to show out here. He's in front of his hometown crowd. He's either going to find the finish himself, or he's going to be laying it on the line so heavy that he's going to gas himself out or make a mistake or something, and Barberena's going to get the finish. But yeah, one way or another there, I thought somebody would be finished, but it's a tough spot because they're both such tough guys, so they put on a crazy action-packed slobber knocker fight. It goes to decision, so we lose 2 units there. So that was a bit of a bummer. The other big lesson that we learn here is I have 3 more parlays. I had Blades, Askarov, Magny, and Fiaho at plus 205 for 1 unit. Grasso, Askarov, and Blades at plus 159 for 1 unit, and Askarov and Magny at minus 103 for half a unit. All of those lost because I put Askarov in all of them. So that was a situation where, I was putting all my eggs in one basket, kind of, because I had 4 parlays here, and I put Askarov in 3 of them, so he busted all of them. And B, the other thing that I can take away from this is that when I first did my tape study, I didn't like Askarov here. Not that I didn't like him to win, but I didn't like that number at all. I was like at minus 300, I was like, I think this fight could be close. I actually didn't like the idea of putting Askarov in my parlays. Like every week when I make these parlays, I'm always picking like a couple of the big favorites that I'm like, I'm going to stay away from that one. Like, for example, Hossa on this card, I didn't put Hossa in any of my parlays, which I ended up being glad about, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But, as the week went on, I listened to other cappers. I heard a lot of opinions. Everybody seemed to think that Askarov was going to cruise. I heard very few people giving Kai much of a chance, so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to roll with Askarov then. So it's a tough spot because what I can say is like, okay, well, I should have trusted my read and I shouldn't have let other people's opinions talk me out of the read that I had. But that's not like across the board necessarily good advice, because I've had other situations where I've been talked out of an opinion and ended up being glad because my initial opinion was wrong. So in this case, I got talked out of the correct opinion that I should have stayed away from Askarov in my parlays, but you never know. Got to live and learn. Next up, we had this is my best bet of the night by far. McMahon by decision at plus 400. I only put a quarter of a unit on that, and I think the lesson I can take away from that is actually somebody on Twitter was talking about this fight, and I said, yeah, I got McMahon by decision at plus 400, and I thought that was like a gift of a line, and I said that I sprinkled it or whatever, and he's like, well, then why did you only sprinkle it? And that got me thinking, like, okay, that's actually a really good question. And the answer to the question, why did I only sprinkle it, is really just because it was a big plus money prop. I mean, not big plus money like plus 1,500 type props or whatever, but it was a prop and it was plus 400. And so whenever it's something like that, I always only automatically sprinkle it. But that's something I need to stop and think about too, because this is a situation where I should have put a whole unit down, or at least half a unit, because, okay, so plus 400, that's what, 20% implied? I know some people were confident that this fight was going to finish. I didn't think it was going to. I felt pretty confident that this fight would go to decision. And if you remember my breakdown, I basically said Sarah McMahon's going to win round 1. Host is probably going to win round 3. But how much of round 2 is Sarah McMahon going to win before she gasses and falls apart? Because that's kind of what she always does. And I was like, I think there's a pretty good chance that she wins enough of round 2 that she wins the decision. So at 20% implied, not like I was totally confident that's how it was going to play out, but I was probably closer to, I was seeing McMahon by decision as more of like a 40% outcome probably than a 20%, so that's a pretty big gap between, how I would line it and how it was actually lined. And that's a situation where, thinking back, I should have put more than a quarter unit on that. And that's something that I need to think about. I need to really kind of the same way I was saying with the big chalky favorites that I used to just not even look at it to be like, I'm not going to play that. But, with these props, I'm always like, oh, if it's a prop and it's a big number, I'm only going to do 0.2 units or a quarter of a unit. And that's something I need to revisit and think about, like, okay, but because a lot of the props I play are like plus 1,500 or more. Obviously, those are just sprinkle situations because I'm practically playing those for fun. That's one of those things where you don't expect those to hit very often, but if you hit them like one out of 10 times, you're up. So you kind of just play those for the heck of it and hope you hit one once in a while. But when it's a prop like that, where I felt that it had probably like a 40% chance of hitting or something, I should have put more on that. Anyway, and then finally, I had Blades by submission, 0.2 units at plus 900. Kind of a weird bet. Blades has never won by submission. But I thought, like most people, I expected this fight to play out mostly on the ground. I expected Blades to do his normal thing and go for takedowns, which he did not do. And I thought, like, okay, well, as the fight goes on, they're going to be on the ground. Probably I was thinking it was going to make it to round 2, maybe even to round 3. And Blades is going to be looking good. Dachhaus is going to be tiring out. Dachhaus is going to be just kind of on his back, probably getting tired. And I thought, hey, maybe they end up in a little bit of a scramble. Maybe they end up kind of rolling around and Blades finds the back and gets the choke. Anyway, nothing even close to any of that happened, of course, because K1 Blades came out, or Golden Gloves Blades, or whatever you want to call him. But the main thing that I take away from this fight, I've believed for quite a while now that Curtis Blades will be the UFC heavyweight champion. Dude's only 30 years old. That's a baby at heavyweight. He literally could fight in the UFC's heavyweight division for another, probably not 15 years, but 12, 13 years. It is not a heavyweights fight past 40 all the time, So it's reasonable to expect that Blades will fight in the UFC's heavyweight division for another 7 or 8 years at least, right? 37, 38. And so just considering the skills that he has now, he's been stopped 3 times. He's been stopped twice by Francis, once by Derek Lewis. He's been caught by those big power punchers, both guys who will not be in the UFC, for as long as Curtis Blades is going to be. And, Curtis Blades has 60-some takedowns in the UFC already, which is far more than any other UFC heavyweight. I think so. Curtis Blades is number 1 for most takedowns as a heavyweight. I think he has 62. Second place for most takedowns as a heavyweight, I think, is Cain Velasquez, and it's only like 40-some. It isn't even close. So obviously we know Blades is a very dominant takedown artist, dominant top game. But now that we've seen him develop his striking skills and develop his confidence as a striker more, man, like I said, I've believed for a while now that he's going to end up being UFC heavyweight champion at some point, and now it's just a matter of I believe he's probably going to reign as UFC heavyweight champion for quite a while when that time comes, because he's getting better and better all the time. By the time he gets another shot at the belt, by the time he wins that belt, he's going to be even better than he is now. He's going to have so many fights of experience behind him at the UFC level already. Just I think Curtis Blades is a special fighter. I think he's already a special fighter, and I think he's one of those guys who could, I've said the same thing about Cyril Gane, and I still believe this about Cyril Gane too, but I think Blades could end up being in the heavyweight GOAT conversation before his career is over. But anyway, overall, we picked up 2.08 units on that event for 11% ROI. I don't love those numbers. It's a win, which is cool because, let's see, I think, I'm looking at the record here. We were coming off, never mind, just 1 loss. But it was a really small loss of 0.14 units, and then the event before that, we had a big win of 8.33 units, so that was cool. But anyway, 2.08 units at 11% ROI. Oh, and then we also picked up 1.3 units on the Cage Warriors event, so that was kind of cool. But we'll take a peek at our overall record here. We're sitting at 65.76 units of profit overall since I started tracking in October. So wait, October, November, December, January, February, March. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we are 6 days away from the 5-month mark of how since I started tracking my bets. So it's been about 5 months. So yeah, 65.76 units of profit at 25% ROI in a period of 5 months. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not really like a big goal setter, but I was like, I've kind of been thinking like, okay, I would love to make 100 units of profit in my first year, not like calendar year, but my first year doing this. So by the time I hit next October, if I can be at 100 units of profit, considering we've picked up 65 in 5 months, it's very doable as long as I don't hit like a big losing streak, which, I expect to be hitting some regression at some point here. If you look at my graph on betmma.tips, I mean, there's a little up and down, but it's pretty, it's kind of a 45-degree angle up. So definitely going to be hitting some regression here at some point, but that's okay. But still, no reason we can't pick up 100 units in that first year. I think that is doable. All right, folks, let's go ahead and jump into that full card breakdown for UFC 273, Volkanovski versus Korean Zombie. Just 1 second. Let me wet the old whistle here. This is a really good card. There's a lot of star power at the top of the card, but a lot of fun fights on the prelims too. A lot of fights that are lined pretty closely. A lot of fights that I'm having a really hard time getting a read on. So, as usual, if it's a fight where I don't feel like I have a great read or I'm not confident, I'm just going to let you know that. I'm still going to kind of give you my thoughts, but there might be some where I don't have a whole heck of a lot to share with you because I just don't feel like I know. First fight of the night, we're kicking it right off with what should be a really fun striking bout between Julio Arce and Daniel Santos. Oh, yeah, I got to remember to actually pull up those odds for you. Julio Arce is the favorite at minus 190 with comeback and Daniel Santos as the underdog at plus 170. This is the kind of fight that if you break down their skills and watch the footage, I think if they both had like an even amount of UFC experience or experience against higher level opponents, I think this fight would be lined much more closely. I think skill-wise, they might actually be fairly close, but this is such a big step up in competition for Daniel Santos. He's looked really good in his regional tape, but now he's, jumping up and taking on I think Arce is like a 7-fight veteran in the UFC. I think he's 4-3 in the UFC. But so Arce attempts 11.8 significant strikes per minute. He lands only 4.14 for an accuracy of 35%, but still throwing more than 11 or throwing 11.8 significant strikes per minute. Even if you're not landing that many, that looks really good to the judge. That just that level of activity. Arce also has a really impressive 93.75% takedown rating. He's had 16 takedown attempts against him at the UFC level, and he's defended 15 of them. So that's pretty awesome. He's a solid striker. He's also a solid grappler. He tends to start kind of slow. He's one of those guys who tends to give away round 1 to make his reads, and then he kind of comes back at you more in round 2 and round 3. And he's coming off of his last fight was a KO loss to Song Yudong, I think. Yeah, I think that was his most recent fight. Daniel Santos, if you watch his footage, he's a fun kickboxer. He's a shoot-a-box fighter. He has that kind of classic shoot-a-box style. He holds that kind of high, tight Muay Thai guard. He kind of has that Muay Thai stance, that Muay Thai style. He throws those big looping punches like you see the shoot-a-box guys throw a lot, like Vanderaa Silva, kind of those huge winging punches. That's sort of his style. He'll also throws head kicks. He throws spinning kicks. So he's got kind of a flashy kickboxing style as well. One thing that's a little bit weird about Santos is he hasn't fought in over 2 years. He's 27 now. So he didn't fight at all between the ages of 25 and 27, which is a little bit strange, but it's also, it's one of those things where, depending upon who you talk to, people have different reads on a fighter taking a long hiatus from fighting. Excuse me. Usually, if it's an older fighter, we kind of tend to consider that a negative thing. Why haven't you been busy? You're going to come back, you're going to have ring rust or whatever. But a fighter in their mid 20s like that, a fighter who hasn't even come into their prime yet, a lot of times we look at that as, okay, you took that 2 years, you've probably gained a lot of skills. You've probably really sharpened up your skills and picked up some new tricks for the toolbox in those 2 years. So we could see a really impressive performance from Santos here. Yeah, Santos is at that like plus 170 money line, which if it wasn't for the big step up in competition, I would probably take a shot on that. I think Santos could look good here in the striking, but I think we could see Arce, potentially decide to use his grappling here too. He's got some decent wrestling. He's got some decent grappling. Santos in the fights that I watched, I didn't watch all, I didn't go back and watch all of his fights, but I watched probably 2 or 3 of them. He did show some decent defensive wrestling. He did stuff some takedowns and sprawl out of some takedowns and that sort of thing. So not necessarily that Arce is going to have easy pickings with the takedowns there. But yeah, I do favor Arce to probably win here. I'm not super, super confident. I don't have a bet on this fight. If I was going to, I probably wouldn't end up betting that Santos money line at plus 170, but it is a little bit tempting because, like I said, if it wasn't for the big step up in competition, I think that would potentially be a pretty good bet. Next up, we've got Piera Rodriguez versus Kay Hansen. Piera Rodriguez is fun to watch. She's a power striker. She doesn't move a whole lot. She's kind of flat-footed. She's not one of those people who's bouncing, using a lot of lateral movement, that kind of thing. She stays fairly still, and she's a counter striker. She's waiting to try to draw her opponent in and land big shots. And she does hit very, very hard, especially for a woman at this weight class. She really can land some punches that are going to snap somebody's head back, and she definitely can find knockouts as well. She also throws elbows in close, which I love to see. When she's clinched up, she'll come with that elbow, which is great because you can cause cuts that way, get a cut stoppage. Plus, elbows are just cool. I like to see people use those elbows. Piera Rodriguez does slow down a little bit as the fight moves on, but she fights pretty well through that exhaustion. So she does, you can see her cardio wane a little bit, but it's not like she death gasses. She does fight through it, but she definitely slows down. Her punches don't land as hard and that sort of thing. Kay Hansen is more of a generalist. Rodriguez, I would say, is mostly a striker. She's shown some wrestling, and obviously at the highest level of mixed martial arts these days, you have to be well-rounded and cross-trained, and Rodriguez certainly is, but definitely I would consider her a striker. Whereas Hansen would be more of a grappler, but I consider her kind of a generalist overall. She'll spend time on the feet striking as well. She's got some decent wrestling. She's got some decent grappling. I do think that this fight largely comes down to there's a couple other fights on the card where I'm going to kind of give it this same read, but I think it largely comes down to whether Hansen is able to have success with her grappling. And not even that necessarily that she's able to find takedowns, but she may even try to just do a lot of cage pushing. She may just try to push Piera Rodriguez up against the cage, spend a lot of time clinching with her there, landing strikes and that sort of thing. Maybe looking for takedowns, looking for trips, etc. But if Kay is able to, even if she can't get takedowns, if she's able to spend large amounts of time just controlling Rodriguez against the fence, if she is able to get takedowns and land ground and pound, even better for her, I think. But if Kay Hansen can't get those takedowns or at least those control positions against the cage, if she spends a lot of time striking out in open space with Piera Rodriguez, then I think this is Piera Rodriguez's fight. I think Hansen will have trouble with that power striking and that boxing of Piera Rodriguez. I haven't placed any bets on this fight. If I had to pick, I would probably pick Kay Hansen. It's not a confident pick at all. If I was going to bet it, I would probably look to... I forgot to pull up the lines. This fight's a coin flip pretty much. Not quite, I guess. Rodriguez is a tiny favorite at minus 115 with the comeback on Kay Hansen at plus 115. So you can get a little bit of plus money. That is a spot that I've been thinking about betting. My book, I use William Hill and Bet Online. Bet Online didn't have any props up yet last time I looked. I've been kind of waiting for those to come up. Depending upon what kind of line I can get on Kay Hansen by decision, I may take a look at that because I think I do kind of lean Hansen to win, and I lean her to win by decision. But it's, I agree with the line that it's a close fight, and I'm not confident in that read. But if I was going to bet it, that is probably what I'd be looking at. Next fight up, we've got Anthony Hernandez versus Josh Fremd. This should be a fun fight. I don't know if you've all have watched any footage on Josh Fremd, but he's kind of fun to watch. He's kind of like, I don't know how well he's going to do here, but he could be a decent fighter. I mean, he's 6'4". He's a huge, long guy for the 185 division, which is always fun to see. He's gotten a lot of knockouts. he's one of those guys who he doesn't, when you see him throw, it doesn't look like he hits really hard. He's not a guy who really loads up or really sits down super hard on his strikes, but he just has solid technique and solid power even without really looking like he's throwing that hard. So he's one of those guys who just kind of throws it out there, but if it lands, it does tend to do some damage. He has definitely knocked some people out, and early. He's got quite a few early finishes, quite a few round one knockouts. So when I was first watching tape, I was thinking, okay, yeah, he might be able to find an early knockout here on Fluffy, but I don't lean toward thinking that's how it's going to play out. Fluffy lands 3.76 takedowns per 15 minutes. Oh, but yeah, that's right. Okay, that's something kind of weird about that stat, though, because he's actually only landed 6 takedowns in his UFC career, and all 6 of them were in the Junyong Park fight. So I guess that is sort of weird. But also, Fluffy does hold his hands pretty low at times, and he does get hit quite a bit, which is something that concerns me a little bit against Fremd, because Fremd, he hits hard, like I said. He's got a long reach, and he really... it's so rare to see those long guys actually do this, but he actually does use his jab well. He keeps his jab out there. He pumps it out there. He keeps it in his opponent's face to try to keep distance, and he throws it regularly, which is nice to see. But, I think Hernandez is probably the more well-rounded fighter here. Fremd does have a wrestling background, but it's not something he looks to use super often. He definitely looks to be more of a striker in his fights. But Hernandez is a solid wrestler and a solid grappler. He just has a solid overall game. And I think we'll potentially see Fluffy Hernandez look to go to his grappling here, because I think even though he's a solid striker as well, I think he's going to understand that that's where he's going to potentially get himself into trouble in this fight. Just trying to see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about here. Fremd has finished 7 of his 9 pro wins with 3 subs and 4 KOs, and 3 of those finishes are in round 1. So yeah, he does have some subs as well. But yeah, and did I pull up the line here? Sorry, I literally forget to do that every single time. We've got Anthony Hernandez at -175. Fremd as the underdog at +170. And this is another situation almost like the Santos and Arce fight, where skill-wise it could potentially be lined closer, but with Fremd making the big step up in competition, making his UFC debut here, I do think you have to favor Hernandez. I don't like a bet here. This almost ends up being like a dog or pass kind of thing for me, just because having Hernandez at like almost -200, I don't really like to put anything on that. I would maybe look at Anthony Hernandez by sub here, as I think that's a pretty reasonably potential way for this fight to play out. But yeah, I'm going to pick Anthony Hernandez to win. I don't have any bets here. This is a card where I'm definitely there's props that I'm going to be excited to look at once I have them available. But like I said, my book hasn't released. My book has released props for the top 3 fights on this card, and that's it so far. Next up, we've got Aleksei Oleinik versus Vanderaa. Hey, look, I'm actually going to pull up the odds ahead of time. Now I just got to hope that they're here, because, oh, there it is. So yeah, this is very, very close to just a coin flip here. Vanderaa, slight favorite at -110. You can get Aleksei Oleinik at even money +100. That line actually seems a little off to me. Let's talk about kind of how a breakdown for this fight a little bit. Vanderaa is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but you sure wouldn't know it from watching his fights. He does not appear to have a solid ground game. He doesn't really have a very good ground game on top or on bottom. We've seen him work off of his back. I mean, he got absolutely smoked against Sergey Spivak on the ground. He got smoked against Romanov on the ground. Oleinik is maybe not like quite the level of wrestler that either of those guys is, but I mean, he's a solid takedown artist. He's got something like 47% takedown defense. I have that stat somewhere in my notes here, but I'm not sure where. But he has not takedown defense, takedown accuracy. He has 40% takedown accuracy, and if I remember correctly, Vanderaa only has 20% takedown defense. If the fight plays out on the feet, Vanderaa probably the better striker. As far as just throwing kind of straighter, more technical type punches. Really, all Aleksei Oleinik does is he kind of throws that big arching overhand right, but he throws it with power. He can hurt you with it for sure. And I look at the Aleksei Oleinik versus Fabricio Verdum fight. We literally saw Oleinik win a striking battle there. I mean, the guy can strike. Usually he's just throwing that big overhand right to, if it catches you and hurts you, great. But mostly he's just looking to close the distance so he can grab onto you and find a takedown. Oleinik's not like a shot wrestler. He's not the kind of guy who's he's 44, 45 years old and he's a little creaky and not super athletic anyway. He's not the kind of guy who's shooting a blast double from the middle of the octagon or anything like that. He's a guy who wants to get a hold of you and work for trips, work for body lock takedowns, that kind of thing, and he's pretty effective with them. And so I think, Oleinik can hold his own on the feet just fine against Vanderaa, I think. Vandeera's not going to knock him out or anything, I don't think. And I really think it's only a matter of time until Oleinik is able to get clinched up with Vanderaa. Like I said, Vanderaa has 20% takedown defense. I think Oleinik should be able to drag him to the ground. And I just think Oleinik's going to, especially if Oleinik's able to get on top, he's able to go for that scarf hold. He works really well from side control. He works well from mount. I mean, if he gets on top, he should have it all over Vanderaa, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him find a submission in this fight. I have not placed a bet on this fight yet. I am interested in Oleinik's money line, and I may. I think my book had him at -110 last I looked, but which is getting close to even money here. I do favor Oleinik quite a bit in this fight, so I don't mind a money line shot. But I am more interested in putting something on either Aleksei Oleinik inside the distance in case he were to find a knockout or find like a ground and pound kind of situation, or Aleksei Oleinik by sub. I don't know what those lines are yet, but those are spots that I am interested in. I do think Oleinik probably wins this fight, and the fact that he's lined as a slight underdog or as a coin flip is a spot that I like. Next fight, we're looking at Vinc Pichel versus Mark Madsen. This is one where I'm having a hard time getting a strong read, but I do think I think it's a cool fight. I think it's an interesting fight. It could be a fun matchup. These guys both have pretty good striking output. Madsen throws more strikes and lands more strikes statistically. Their striking accuracy and striking defense are both pretty close to each other within like a couple of percentage points. One thing that does concern me here, Madsen has 60% takedown accuracy, and Pichel only has 25% takedown defense. Madsen has 31% control time against his opponents, and Pichel has been controlled 19% of the time. Madsen has been controlled 0% of the time so far in his UFC fights. So, obviously Madsen is an Olympic-level wrestler. Obviously has put together, a more full mixed martial arts game at this point. He's got some striking. He throws pretty hard. Not a great striker by any means. Definitely more of a wrestler, but so it's very likely looking at that. Madsen has that 60% takedown accuracy. Pichel only has 25% takedown defense. So I think it's reasonable to assume that Madsen will get takedowns in this fight. Madsen, I see it almost the way I broke down the McMahon-Hossa fight. Like Madsen will probably get takedowns early if he wants them. Probably win round 1. Probably get takedowns in round 2. But the thing is, Madsen is a guy who can start to slow down, and Pichel is one of those fighters who actually tends to get better as the fight goes on. We'll sometimes see him have his best round in round 3. He'll come alive. He'll get his second wind. He'll be putting out more output in round 3 than he was in round 1. So this is one of those fights where I don't mind looking at, once the props are out on my book, I don't mind looking at Pichel to finish in round 3 here, because I think, Madsen is probably going to have success early, but especially if he's doing a lot of wrestling, because even though Pichel doesn't have the greatest takedown defense, he does have a pretty good get-up game, and he isn't a guy who likes to settle in on his back. If you get a takedown on him, he is a guy who's working to get up. So if he is able to get up and make Madsen continue to take him down, continue to work for those takedowns, I think we could see Madsen tire out. And so if Madsen's able to win the first 2 rounds and then he tires out in the third, if it does go to decision, I do think Madsen by decision is a reasonable outcome here. But if he ends up, tiring out a bit too much in round 3 and Pichel finds a second wind and is able to, and here's the thing, Vinc Pichel is a decent wrestler too. Obviously he doesn't have the wrestling on paper that Madsen does, But Vinc Pichel has decent MMA wrestling, and it's not out of the question that as we get into round 3, when Madsen is tiring out and Pichel is, kind of finding his energy more and more, we could even see Pichel get takedowns on Madsen. That certainly is not impossible here. So, yeah, I don't know. As far as a bet here, I don't mind looking at fight goes the distance. Besides the possibility, like I said, of Madsen just like tiring out and Pichel finishing him in the end, which I don't think is all that likely. I do think this fight probably goes to decision. As for a bet, I think this fight is potentially a good live betting spot because, like I said, I think Madsen will have success early and then could fade later. And those are the spots that are really good to look for live betting because, obviously if a guy dominates round 1, then you're going to get a better line on the other guy going into round 2 because he's losing the fight at that point. But if you know that info, if you know, okay, this guy tends to gas and this guy tends to do better as the fight goes on, you might get a good line on Pichel here. Another thing I noticed watching the tape is Madsen does like to take the center and control the pace, and Pichel does tend to allow himself to be pressured and sort of circle along the outside, which is something that can, that can look good for Madsen to the judges. But yeah, I don't like a pre-flop bet here. I like to just keep an eye on the live lines here, and potentially bet Pichel, especially if Madsen is using a lot of energy early. Next fight is Mickey Gall versus Mike Malott. What do we got for the betting line here? Mickey Gall and Mike Malott. We've got Mike Malott favored at -184. Mickey Gall is the underdog at +170. It's hard to get a comfortable read on Malott. He's only fought 9 times. He's been a pro for 10 years, and he's only fought 9 times. Very weird. You don't see that a lot. And most of his fights have been over in like a minute or two. He's an aggressive guy that comes out and tries to find the finish, which is great for him, but it's difficult to, it's like watching tape on Khamzat Chimaev. Like it's difficult to really get a read. It's like, okay, I know what this guy looks like when he's dominating, but I have no idea what he looks like when he's not dominating. Let's see. Malott's last fight that wasn't over in round 1 was a Bellator fight in 2015. And I did watch that fight, but I'm not a big believer in putting a lot of stock in a fight that happened a long time ago. If I did this for a living, if I didn't have a job, yeah, I'd probably watch tape. I'd watch probably all the way back if I had time to do that. But usually I only watch 2 or 3 fights back at the most. But I also think that, like, if you're going back much further than that, how much are you really learning? Especially when it's younger fighters who are getting better and better and better all the time. Like if I watch a fight from 4 or 5 years ago, I'm not watching the same fighter as I'm getting today. In my opinion, people are changing and growing and getting better all the time. So Malott is accustomed to winning his fights quickly, and he's a guy who comes out and looks for that early finish. He doesn't necessarily wait to make reads. He just kind of looks to push his game. And I wouldn't say necessarily that he's especially reckless or that he puts himself in bad positions, but he does, he's accustomed to getting that finish, and he does come out and look for it, which I think is something that could work pretty well against Mickey Gall, because one thing we've seen from Mickey Gall is, if we look at the Alex Morono fight, for example, in that fight, Gall just never really finds a sense of urgency. I mean, he kind of does, but not until there's like a minute left in the fight, and by that point, it's just too little too late. But he's losing the fight on the feet. He's getting outstruck, but he never really changes the game plan. He just stays kind of loose and relaxed and not putting out a whole lot of output and not, no real sense of urgency, not a lot of aggression. And even though he's losing, he just doesn't change that. He just kind of lets it happen. So, if this fight starts and Malott comes out in his usual way and comes out with his aggression looking to push, and Mickey Gall is kind of just doing his sort of relaxed hanging out thing, I mean, Gall could absolutely get caught and be just another guy under Malott's belt that he finished quickly in the first round. That wouldn't necessarily surprise me a ton. Malott trains at Alpha Male. Allegedly, he's not at Alpha Male for this fight, is what I heard. I heard he's training in Canada for this fight. I don't know for sure if that's true, but that's what I heard. He has a pretty even number of wins by sub and KO. So, I mean, he's well-rounded. He's able to win in different ways. I think he has faster hands than Gall. I think he's just a quicker guy than Gall and is more athletic. I think Gall's hands aren't very fast. He has some power, but his strikes are sort of slow. He's definitely, Gall has definitely improved his striking. He's improved his game overall, but he's definitely, he was a guy who started out mainly as a grappler. He's improved his striking enough that he's comfortable on the feet, but still not enough that he looks real great, or that he's more comfortable on the feet maybe than he should be, I guess I would say. And going back again to like in the Morono fight, like he's clearly comfortable enough on the feet that he just decided to stay on the feet throughout that fight, even though he was losing. He, maybe he didn't realize he was losing. I don't really know exactly, but I think he's gotten comfortable enough on the feet now that he doesn't realize maybe that his best win condition is still to get fights to the ground. So he's not necessarily looking to do that. But anyway, I think it is reasonable to. Oh yeah, I didn't pull up the odds here. Malott is favored, or maybe I did. I don't remember. Malott's minus 184 as a favorite. Come back on Gall is plus 170. Yeah, we've had like 3 fights in a row or something that. 3 out of the last 4 where the lines were like almost the same. So yeah, Malott is favored, which I think makes sense. It is the situation where we've got the guy coming in and making his UFC debut and being favored over a UFC veteran. However, I do still think it makes sense here. I mean, Malott's been he's been a pro for a long time. He hasn't necessarily fought super high level competition, but he's trained at Alpha Male for a long time. I heard that he's one of the striking coaches at Alpha Male, maybe. So, I mean, the guy's, a high-level competitor, despite the fact that he's making his UFC debut. And Mickey Gall, even though he's a UFC veteran, he's a lower-level UFC veteran. He's not a guy with a ton of high-quality wins. He's a guy that, let's be honest, he was brought into the UFC simply because they needed someone to fight CM Punk. I actually attended that fight live in Cleveland, but anyway. So yeah, they needed somebody to fight CM Punk. They brought Mickey Gall in. And, I'm not going to talk shit on Mickey Gall. He has developed his game and ended up becoming, a guy who can stick around on the roster. He's a solid enough fighter to be on the roster, but not particularly impressive. And therefore, yeah, I do think it makes sense to favor Malott here. I do think Malott probably gets the win. I wouldn't bet it though. I mean, if I was going to bet anything here, I would potentially, I would maybe look at if you can get like Mike Malott in round 1 or something like that, since he does win fights that way a lot. I wouldn't mind a sprinkle on something like that, since that's a win condition that has come through for him a bunch of times in the past. But if I was going to bet, more of a money line here, I would potentially actually look at betting Mickey Gall's money line, just because, more of a dog or pass situation there, just because you're getting that plus 175 on the guy who does have the solid UFC experience, even though I do favor Malott to win, I think. All right, next fight on the docket, we've got Aspen Ladd versus Raquel Pennington. Pennington is coming in on short notice here. I think it was just like 2 weeks maybe. I'm not sure exactly, but it wasn't very long. So that's really the only thing that concerns me a little bit here. I do think Pennington is the better fighter. If we look at the odds here, Pennington is, I think she's around minus 200. Okay, you can have Pennington for minus 188. Aspen Ladd can be had for plus 170. So again, another fight with almost the same lines as the last one. I do think it makes sense for Pennington to be a decent-sized favorite like that. Like I said, the late notice does concern me a little bit, but I really think if the fight plays out on the feet, I think Pennington is going to box Ladd up. Raquel Pennington is a solid striker, has solid boxing. I mean, her nickname is Rocky, after all. She's a solid boxer. Aspen Ladd doesn't really have great boxing. I mean, Aspen Ladd is really more of a she's more of a top control grappler. She does her best work if she's able to get takedowns and work from top position. I think she will be looking to do that here. However, Pennington is, even though she's more of a striker, she's solid on the ground. She's comfortable on the ground. She can hold her own. I don't see Ladd being able to take her down easily or hold her down easily. I do think there's a good chance that this fight does play out on the feet for decent spells. And even if, Ladd may try to push Pennington up against the cage and just cage push her and clinch her and work her that way. Pennington is comfortable there. Pennington works well there. She can handle herself just fine there. I also think Pennington might be kind of just the more physical fighter. I think she might actually look stronger in tie-ups and in clinches and just have an easier time controlling Ladd than the other way around. Let's see. Rocky lands 3.66 significant strikes per minute and absorbs 3.1. Lad lands 3.64 and absorbs 3.93. So they're landing almost the same, but Lad absorbs almost 1 significant strike more per minute than Pennington. So yeah, if it plays out on the feet, I do think Rocky's going to be getting the better of it. I think Rocky hits harder. She can get pretty aggressive with her strikes at times. Yeah, I just think overall I do favor Rocky to win here. After doing the tape study, I was leaning, favoring Rocky at around minus 200 or 66%, which is almost about where she's ended up here. So, yeah, Raquel Pennington will be my pick. I'd probably pick her to win by decision, although I guess a stoppage is possible. But we're likely looking at a decision here. If I was gonna bet the fight, I would. I don't have a bet on this. I would maybe look to use Pennington as a parlay piece. The only reason I haven't, I was on my William Hill app and I parlayed her. I put her in a parlay with somebody. I can't remember who it was. And then I was about to hit the button to place the bet and I hesitated and I didn't do it. And the only reason I didn't do it is just that late notice, the late replacement thing kept me off it. But otherwise I do think that Pennington is a decent bet at like the minus 180 or minus 190 or thereabouts that she's at. I will also be looking, once I've got the props up for my book, I'll probably be looking at Raquel Pennington by decision as well. And if I can get a decent number on that, I may look to play that. Next fight, we're moving to the heavyweight division. Y'all know I love heavyweights. I love the heavyweight division. We're looking at Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Marcin Tybura. Let's see, what have we got for a betting line on this one? We've got, okay, all right, Jairzinho Rozenstruik favored at minus 144. Marcin Tybura can be had for plus 138. I've been eyeing a bet on Tybura. He was at like plus 120, like plus 130. I kept thinking like, man, if he gets up to like plus 140, plus 150, I would probably take a shot on that. But I think this one is another great live betting spot, because there's a very good chance, like Jair Rozenstruik winning this fight by knockout in round 1 is likely. Even though I'm leaning on a Tybura bet, it's not like I don't understand that Rozenstruik is a guy who finds early knockouts quite often. Tybura is a guy who has been knocked out in the UFC 3 times. He's been knocked out by Derek Lewis, Shamil Abdurrahimov, and Augusto Sakai. So he can be finished by strikes. Jair is a guy who does finish people by strikes. So, and that's also why I've kind of stayed off betting this fight, is because, yeah, I could just take Marcin Tybura at plus 135 or whatever and just hope he survives that early onslaught from Jairzinho. Because I do think that if the fight goes past round 1, I think we're going to start to see Tybura take over most likely. We've seen Tybura, like, okay, using the Greg Hardy fight as an example, or even the Walt Harris fight, we have seen him get overwhelmed early by aggressive power strikers. Hardy landed big shots on him, Harris landed big shots on him, but Tybura was able to cover up. He was able to survive. He was able to survive the round and then take over with striking and eventually grappling in round 2. And I think that we could see this fight play out that same way if we do get to round 2. So what I'll probably do is avoid betting the fight ahead of time. Keep an eye on the fight in round 1. Fingers crossed that Jair doesn't find that knockout. And then if he doesn't, and because Jair is likely going to have a good round 1, same kind of situation we were talking about before, he's likely going to have a good round 1. He's likely going to win that round. He's likely going to land some good shots. Then we'll get a good number going into round 2 with Tybura. And not that Jair isn't still dangerous. I mean, look at what he did to Overeem. I mean, he finished Overeem with just a few seconds left in round 5. So, I mean, Jair carries that power late into the fight, but he does slow down a lot, and he doesn't throw a whole lot. He actually only averages 2.8 significant strikes per minute. And you got to imagine, if that's broken down by round, most of that's early in the fight in round 1. He probably throws even fewer significant strikes than that, later in the fight as he kind of slows down and quits throwing as much. So Jairzinho does have 75% takedown defense, and he has a pretty decent get-up game, especially when he, earlier in the fight. But as the fight moves on, he's probably going to be easier to take down, easier to hold down. We have seen Tybura get submissions. We've seen him get ground and pound finishes. I mean, and he's capable of knockouts as well. I don't think he's going to knock out Jairzinho, but Yeah, I'm gonna say, as for a pick, I am gonna lean Tybura as a pick here. It's not a confident pick. As for bets, I don't mind looking at fight doesn't go the distance here. I forgot to put in my notes what that was lined at. I'm guessing you can't probably get a real great number on that because I don't think this fight will go the distance. But yeah, like I said, I think it's a good spot to look at the live bet, or maybe look at that prop for Jairzinho to finish in round 1. I don't know what that's at because, like I said, I don't have props on my book yet. But yeah, I like Tybura to probably survive that onslaught in round 1 and to be able to sort of take over in round 2, probably find takedowns and potentially find a ground and pound finish in round 2 or round 3. All right, the next fight. For the next fight, we move to a couple of newer up-and-comers in the UFC. We move to Ian Garry versus Darian Weeks. What have we got for a betting line there? We've got Garry as a huge favorite at minus 350. Darian Weeks come back on him as plus 295. This is an interesting matchup because it's clear that the UFC machine is behind Ian Garry, right? We had Conor McGregor, and now we've got Paddy Pimblett, and then right behind him we've got Ian Garry, right? Like when we see the UFC, obviously they don't do the greatest job of building stars necessarily, but you can kind of tell when they've hitched their wagon to somebody, especially fighters from different markets where they're really trying to make a splash. When they've got a guy like Song Yadong and they're looking to get the Asian market, and then when they've got Moreno, finally they've got a champion out of Mexico. They love to find these fighters that they can specifically position to get more eyes from specific markets. And the European market definitely has their eyes on Ian Garry, and the UFC knows that. So Garry's made his UFC debut against Jordan Williams. The best way to explain the way that fight played out is that Ian Garry won impressively, but he did not look impressive until the moment he won impressively, right? I think people were expecting Ian Garry. I mean, Jordan Williams he's a solid enough fighter, but not a spectacular fighter. A guy that you could argue is not UFC level, whatever UFC level means. I mean, he's a tough guy, but not, doesn't necessarily have super high level skills. People kind of expected Ian Garry to walk right through him. I think the UFC probably were trying to give Garry a winnable fight there. Maybe not a squash match, but when they've got a guy like that, they're trying to match him up to get wins, to get that machine going. And he did get the win, but Jordan Williams looked really good in that fight. Jordan Williams was rocking Ian Garry up. Ian Garry does that thing. A lot of fighters do this. I pointed this out in the breakdown for Cyril Gane versus Francis Ngannou. I pointed out the same tendency in Cyril Gane. Ian Garry, when his opponent is coming forward throwing strikes, Ian Garry doesn't keep a guard. He doesn't cover up at all. He just kind of does this. He just kind of leans back, and he moves straight backwards, and he leans back. And what can happen is he'll move straight backwards into the fence, and then he's just there, So that's a tendency that can be capitalized on if he doesn't change that. If he doesn't start moving laterally, or if he doesn't start covering up, or both, he just literally moves straight backwards and pulls his chin back and hopes he's going to get out of the way. I don't know if Darian Weeks is the guy who's going to be able to capitalize on that, but just something that I noticed. Ian Garry is pretty hittable. Jordan Williams was able to tag him up pretty good in that first round, and so. I think the UFC wants Ian Garry to get a win here. Not that always works for them. Sometimes it backfires. I mean, it almost backfired in that Jordan Williams fight, really. But I do think that they're probably trying to give Darian Weeks to Ian Garry as a beatable opponent, and he is a beatable opponent. However, where that line is at now with Garry being like minus 350 to minus 370, I don't think I agree with that. Ian Garry does look like a really solid prospect. He's got the skills for sure. He's got striking. He's got grappling. He's got he's flashy. He does kind of fun things. Like, he's fun to watch on the ground. He's really flexible. He gets into kind of weird positions. He's good on the mic. Like, he's definitely a guy that, like I said, that the UFC is behind, and he does have solid skills. But he's one of those guys that when I'm watching him, he almost strikes me as, and he's only like 24 years old, so I guess it makes sense. But he's one of those guys that strikes me as a guy who. I feel like he doesn't necessarily know what he wants to be doing in there all the time. And because I think he does have really well-rounded skills. He has a variety of things that he can do in the cage. And I think he's like trying to figure out what he wants to do from moment to moment. Like just the way he kind of does his decision making. I'm watching him and I'm thinking like, I don't know that he has a solid game plan that he's sticking to, or a solid idea from moment to moment of what it is that he wants to do. I feel like he's just kind of reacting to what's happening and kind of going with the flow, which can be effective for some fighters. I don't know if it's the greatest idea for him at the beginning of his UFC career at age 24, but he's a guy that has some solid skills. He isn't necessarily putting them all together in the best way right now, but he will over time probably, because he is pretty young and he's only going to get better and better training. I think he's at Sanford now, if I'm not mistaken. He's been putting in wrestling rounds with Michael Chandler. I know he said he's been working on his wrestling, working on his offensive and defensive wrestling. Darian Weeks, obviously, he's only had one UFC fight so far. He fought Bryan Barberena on late notice, and he looked pretty good. I mean, he took Barberena down numerous times. He did lose that fight, but he went to decision, and some people were arguing that he potentially won that fight. He had a good showing, very late notice against a solid, tough, scrappy guy in Bryan Barberena. Barberena's he's not one of those guys who's known to be super, super skilled and technical, but he's got a solid game and he's a tough guy, and Darian Weeks ended up looking pretty decent against him. So it wasn't, even though he lost, it wasn't a bad debut. So I think that the line is potentially off here. I favor Garry to win. I don't know that I would bet Weeks, but man, I don't know. Weeks is a tough guy. He's pretty well-rounded. He's got a solid wrestling game. I mean, Ian Garry's been working on his wrestling, and it's not like his wrestling has looked terrible, but that is something that you always kind of have to keep in mind when you've got a fighter who's been training in Europe for all of his life, is that, nothing against the Europeans, and they're starting to catch up. Everybody's catching up everywhere with everything, but, there is always kind of the standard knowledge that the level of wrestling training in Europe just isn't as high as it is in America, and I think that that's still true. How much longer will it be true? I don't know, but if Darian Weeks looks to push the wrestling here, could he have success getting Ian Garry down and holding him down? Is Ian Garry going to be able to find a submission off of his back if we do end up in those positions? I don't know, but I definitely think this fight could play out more closely than that minus 350 to minus 370 range on Garry suggests. So I guess I personally would not. I know people are probably going to be using him in parlays at that number. I probably wouldn't parlay him. I do pick Ian Garry to win. I wouldn't bet him. If I was going to bet this fight, I don't know. I was looking at the over 1.5. I don't remember what the number was on that, but it was set at 1.5. Like, Ian Garry is a guy who's gotten a lot of quick finishes. I kind of don't think he's going to find a quick finish here. It wouldn't super surprise me if he did, but I lean toward thinking that he probably won't. Depending. I might even look at, when I get props on my book, I might even look at Darian Weeks by decision here. And considering he's at close to plus 300, I forgot what it was. Plus 295. If I can get Darian Weeks by decision at plus 600 or something like that, I might put a little bit on that, because I do think this fight could play out closely, and I think it could go to decision. All right, next fight up. Next up, we're looking at Mackenzie Dern versus Tecia Torres. This is a fun fight. I like watching both of these two a lot. I've always liked Tecia Torres. I just think she's a cool person and she's fun to watch. Mackenzie Dern's fun to watch as well. This is one of those fights where, I never like to buy too heavily into a completely binary breakdown, but I do think this kind of falls into that. I do think this is a situation where Mackenzie Dern needs to get this fight to the ground to win, and Tecia Torres needs to keep the fight on the feet to win, I think. So I do think it comes down to whether or not you think Mackenzie Dern is going to be able to successfully get Tecia Torres to the ground and keep her on the ground for decent spells of time. If we watch Mackenzie Dern's last fight against Marina Rodriguez, we saw her have success with her grappling early, but then that was a 5-round fight. As the fight progressed, we saw her be comfortable just just striking on the feet, even though she was losing. Kind of the same thing I said about Mickey Gall against Alex Morono. Even though Dern was losing the striking battle, we did not see her push her grappling. And I don't know if that was potentially... I mean, it was a 5-round fight. Obviously, wrestling and grappling takes a lot out of you, cardio-wise. So is it possible that Dern was just looking to conserve her gas tank because she knew she was in a 5-round fight and that wasn't something she was accustomed to doing? That could be. But yeah, she basically would, after round 1, a lot of times what she would end up doing was she would maybe shoot one takedown and not even like chain it together and work really hard, but kind of shoot one takedown. And if that initial attempt got stuffed, she would just kind of give it up and strike for the rest of the round. We saw her do that numerous times. And then maybe like a couple times she did try to push the wrestling with like 20 or 30 seconds left in the round. But by that point, it was kind of too little too late as well. So, are we going to see something similar here? One thing that concerns me a little bit was that Torres got out wrestled and out grappled by Angela Hill in spots in that fight. And, obviously, Mackenzie Dern is a much better grappler, jiu-jitsu-wise, than Angela Hill. But Mackenzie Dern's not necessarily a great wrestler. So that concerned me a little bit until I thought about that. Like okay, Angela Hill, she's a kickboxer, but she's developed her game. She's not a terrible wrestler. She's not a great grappler, but, I mean, she can wrestle a little bit. So just because Hill was able to have some wrestling success against Torres doesn't necessarily mean that Dern's going to be able to take her down and keep her down. But, yeah, I do really think it just comes down to whether you think Dern can get Torres down and keep her down. Torres throws if it stays on the feet, Torres throws a lot of volume. She hits hard. She throws fast, straight punches. Dern has improved her striking some, but she's still fairly rudimentary on the feet. I definitely don't think she's going to be able to keep up with Tecia Torres in the striking if this fight does play out on the feet. Torres is very small. She's going to be much smaller here, but Torres is always small against everybody, and she makes it work for her. So yeah, as far as a pick here, I am going to pick Tecia Torres to be able to keep it on the feet most of the time and to be able to win a decision, probably. Did I pull up the line here? I don't think I did. It's pretty much a coin flip. Oh, where is it? Where are you? It's not, for some reason, it's not showing it on this that I've got pulled up here, but last I looked, I believe it was like they were both pretty close to somewhere in the minus 110 range. I mean, it wasn't quite a coin flip, but it was pretty close. And last I looked, you could get Torres by decision at plus 160. That was on my William Hill book. I would potentially look at betting the fight goes the distance or Torres by decision, because I think if Dern wins here, it's likely a submission. I think Torres has maybe never been subbed. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look through a record quick, but I don't think Dern finding a sub here is super likely. It would be possible for Dern to win a decision if we spend a lot of time on the ground and she has a lot of time in top position and is controlling Torres on the ground, but I think that's unlikely. I do think the fight probably goes to decision, and I do think Torres probably wins that decision, so I may look to bet that Torres by decision at plus 160, but I haven't done so yet. All right, moving on. We're getting to these last 3 fights. These crazy this is going to be a fun card, you guys. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. This is going to be a lot of fun. But next up, we've got Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev. I mean, what can you say about this fight? Khamzat is the hottest prospect in the sport right now, bar none. The guy's he's had 4 UFC fights. He's blasted all 4 of his opponents out of there very easily. He's, I think, 10-0 or 11-0 in MMA overall, and he's basically blasted all of his opponents out of there very quickly and very easily. He can get you out of there with strikes. He can get you out of there with grappling. He can submit you. I mean, he's solid everywhere. He's very big for the weight class. He's very strong. He's very aggressive. I think this is potentially a live betting spot too. It's hard for me to know what to say about this fight. Okay, well, let's look at that line first, because that's a good place to start talking about it here. Where are you? Why am I having trouble finding these lines? All right, I don't see it. I'm gonna pull it up on my William Hill app. I know approximately what it's at. I know Gilbert Burns is at about plus 425, and I think Khamzat might be like minus 550 or something like that. But I'm gonna pull it up so I'm not just making stuff up here. All right, so on William Hill. Yeah, exactly what I said. On William Hill, Khamzat is minus 550. Gilbert Burns is plus 425. Now, I believe that is a implied percentage. That plus 425 on Gilbert Burns implies that he has an 18% chance to win this fight. Even though Khamzat is as impressive as he is, I do feel like that line is a little bit crazy. I'm not going to lie. It just feels weird to think that Gilbert Burns has a less than 20% chance against any welterweight on the planet, even Khamzat. That just doesn't seem right to me. And when I break down the fight, when I go through and imagine how the fight plays out, I do see Khamzat winning. I do think Khamzat could even come out here and blow him out of the water in round 1 like he's done against everyone else. But even though I can see that possibly happening, I still feel like there's value on Gilbert Burns at plus 425. It still just seems weird to me to think Gilbert Burns has an 18% chance here. It just seems crazy to me. I don't know. And yet I haven't bet it. So obviously it doesn't seem too crazy to me. I mean, because I keep thinking that, as this week plays out, I think more and more people are going to be putting Khamzat in their parlays. I think we're going to see Burns get up to like plus 500 or something probably. And, if that happens, I will have to put a little something on Burns at plus 500. But I sort of see this fight a little bit like how I see the Jairzinho versus Tybura fight as far as thinking that it's a good live betting spot. Because, yes, Khamzat might come out here and just blow Burns out of the water in round 1. How are we going to see Khamzat approach this fight? I don't know. I mean, obviously he knows Burns is very dangerous on the ground, but Khamzat's dangerous on the ground too. And I think when we see these guys face off, Khamzat is going to dwarf Burns. I mean, Khamzat is 4 inches taller, and I think Khamzat is just going to be the much bigger, more physical, stronger guy here. I think even if they do go to the ground, it could potentially be tough for Burns because Khamzat is a good wrestler, and he's just so strong. He's just so physically overpowering that I think it could be problematic for Burns. However, there's still so much that we don't know about Khamzat, and I really, really want to underline that point here. That's something that I really want to make sure we're thinking about is we know what Khamzat Chimaev looks like when he's dominating. We do not know what he looks like when he's not dominating. We know he's a fantastic hammer. We don't know what kind of nail he is. We don't know what kind of chin he has. We don't know what he looks like off of his back. We don't know how well he takes a shot. We don't know how his heart and mindset holds up if he's on his back and is getting hammer fisted in the face. I mean, we've got reasons to believe, like, I know the guy works super hard. I know he's probably going to have excellent cardio. But here's the thing. We also know that some of that is genetic. We know that there are fighters who work really, really hard on their cardio and still don't have very good cardio because they just don't have very good cardio. They've made their cardio better by working hard, but it's only as good as it is. And then there's guys, look at Clay Guida, for example. Clay Guida has the kind of cardio where he can fight hard for 5 minutes, and then when the fight is over, he gets up and he's still jumping up and down. Now, is that because Clay Guida works that much harder than everyone else? Of course not. That's partially genetic. He was partially born with that. I could work as hard as Clay Guida does, and I wouldn't have that same cardio because I just wasn't born with the physicality, the body, the cardio that he has. So even though we know Chimaev works very, very hard, I mean, the guy is a total hoss. He is out there working his ass off. We know that, but that does not mean that he's going to have amazing cardio. We don't know. Does he probably have amazing cardio? Sure, he probably does, but we don't know. And he comes out so aggressively. He always comes out looking to wrestle aggressively, and then once he's on the ground, he goes Donkey Kong style with the strikes. I don't know if you've ever done that, if you train, but next time you're in the gym, straddle one of those bags, or a dummy or a bag or whatever. Straddle it and just go Donkey Kong on it really hard, as hard as you can, like that, for about 20 seconds, and just see how you feel. That shit tires you out. That tires you out hard. So What if Khamzat comes out the way that he always does, comes out super hard like a bat out of hell, and he's able to take Burns down, and he's going Donkey Kong on him, but Burns is able to roll out, and then he's striking again, and he's working hard and whatever. Like, what if that's how the round 1 plays out, and yet we get into round 2? Now what does Khamzat look like? Is he going to be able to come out with that same ferocity and that same aggression after working that hard in round 1? I don't know, but it doesn't seem likely. You know, I don't know. And I just think there are so many questions marks here. And I think the people who are confidently parlaying Chimaev, confidently picking Chimaev to win, confidently betting him to win in round 1, whatever it is they might be doing, I think they're forgetting to think about that. I think we're so accustomed to seeing Chimaev come out and do Chimaev things that we don't even know what happens when he doesn't, or if he does Chimaev things and they don't have the usual effect that they do, which is finishing the fight. So I think this is a fight that you want to look at betting live, because Chimaev is probably going to come out and have a great first round, probably even going to get Burns out of there in the first round. But if he doesn't, you're probably going to get a fantastic line. Like I said, I think there's already value on Burns at plus 425. By the time the fight starts, is he going to be up at like plus 500? Maybe. There's even better value on that. However, if Chimaev comes out and absolutely dominates and beats the hell out of Burns in round 1, but doesn't get the finish, now are you going to get plus 1,000 on Burns? You know, I don't know, but I think that's what I want to look at, is looking at live betting this if we get through round 1. But as far as, you know, looking at the technical breakdown here, obviously Khamzat is much bigger. He is a good striker. He's got great power. Burns is a decent striker and has heavy hands and big power too. But I think Chimaev is probably going to be the better striker, and obviously he's got the bigger reach and is just the bigger guy. He's got fast hands. I think Burns is probably going to have trouble on the feet. If they go to the ground, obviously, you know, Burns has those. You know, not only is he a great grappler in an MMA sense, he still competes in sport jiu-jitsu and competes at the highest level and even beats some of the highest level guys still. So, I mean, he is a very high level grappler. However, Chimaev is also a great grappler and is very strong and dominant in that way. Like I said, you know, I've seen people saying that they think that because of how dangerous Burns is on the ground that Chimaev is going to not want to go to the ground. I don't think that's necessarily true. I guess we'll see, but yeah, at this point, I'm just kind of talking in circles, telling you the same things over and over again, like I tend to do when I just start blabbing about a fight. But yeah, I personally, at that like minus 550 or whatever, I wouldn't parlay Chimaev. Well, I don't think you're getting enough. I don't think you're adding enough value to a parlay by putting him in there that it's worth it, because of all the things that we don't know, especially if we get outside of the first round. So yeah, if Gilbert gets up to like plus 500, I may sprinkle his money line a little bit. I may also look at some of his props. But yeah, I'm mostly going to be interested in potentially betting Gilbert live if we get out of the first round, which we probably won't, if I'm being honest. But I'm Team Gilbert here. I would love to see Gilbert win this. Not that I don't love Khamzat. Not that I don't think Khamzat is the future of the division. I believe that that's true, but I'm a guy who's always pulling for the underdog. I always want, when everybody is counting someone out, I want that person to win. I don't even care who it is. So I would love to see Burns win here. You know, Chimaev is going to lose eventually. Is it going to be Saturday against Burns? I don't know, but I think it would be cool if it was. All right, next up, another banger. Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. We've seen this fight play out before. The big thing that Aljo had going for him in the first fight was his pace and his pressure. He brought a lot of aggression. He brought a lot of volume. You know, I think you can argue about who was winning the fight early, that first round and that second round. Sterling was definitely pouring the volume on. He wasn't necessarily hurting Yan, and Yan definitely had his moments. They went back and forth. It was just a really good high-action back-and-forth fight. But I think you definitely have to agree that at least early, Sterling was in the fight and was holding his own. You know, I mean, it was a close back-and-forth kind of fight early. But that was largely just because Sterling was pouring on the pace and the pressure so much to a level that there's no way he could keep up for 5 rounds. So, and the way Petr Yan works, Petr Yan is like a machine, you know. he hangs out, and he's literally like a robot. He's got like a computer in his head that's like making reads like dun, 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 like, oh, I can let you win the first 2 rounds, and then I will have all my reads, and then I will take over kind of thing, you know? So like, you know, he was picking his moments, picking his spots, landing his strikes in those first 2 rounds. But Peter Yan understands that he knew that the way Aljamain Sterling was pouring on that pace and volume, that Sterling wasn't going to be able to keep that up. So all he had to do was wait until Sterling started to slow down, and then he could just look to take over. How is Sterling going to come out and approach the fight differently this time? Will he approach the fight differently this time? You know, and I can't remember who it was. I heard, maybe it was even one of the commentators on that first fight, I can't remember, saying that they thought that Aljamain Sterling's game plan wasn't very good. Like, you know, coming out with that kind of pace and pressure isn't a smart game plan against Yan because you're not going to be able to keep it up. But here's the thing. How does Aljamain Sterling, you know, if you agree that he won round 1 and or round 2, which he may have, he may not have, whatever, it was close. I think if he wasn't bringing that pace and that pressure, he would have clearly lost those rounds, the ones that he may have won. So like, to say it's not a good game plan, like, bringing that pace and pressure was the only thing that was keeping that fight close, in my opinion. If he hadn't been bringing that level of pace and pressure, he probably would have been being dominated in every round, you know, because that was really what Sterling had going for him, was that pace and that pressure. Obviously, Sterling has, he's a great grappler. He's an opportunistic grappler. Look what he did against Corey Sandhagen. Could he do something like that against Petr Yan? Maybe. I don't think it's likely, but I mean, yeah, could he just find that exact right moment early in the fight and jump on Jan's back? It's possible, but I don't think it's very likely. And therefore, it's hard for me to see how Aljamain Sterling wins this fight. I don't think it's hard for me to see him winning a decision because, like I said, in order to even win minutes of the fight early, he had to pour on that pace and that pressure, which he can't keep up, and then Yan would take over late. If he doesn't pour on that pace and that pressure, then I don't think he's even going to be winning early. You see what I mean? I don't mean to oversimplify the way I'm breaking this down, but that's really how I see it. So I see it as like, if Aljamain Sterling doesn't, it's hard to imagine Aljamain Sterling winning this fight unless he finds a finish. And it's really hard to imagine him finding a finish. But I think that's his best chance. I feel like Aljamain Sterling finding a submission feels more likely to me than him winning a decision here, because I just knowing how smart of a fighter Petr Yan is, and knowing the reads that Petr Yan makes, and figuring out where his moments are to pour on his aggression, where his moments are. He knows what to do and when to do it. He's just such a smart fighter, and I just can't see him losing enough minutes to Aljamain Sterling over 25 minutes to lose a decision. I just don't think that that's very likely. That said, I am really interested to see how Aljamain Sterling comes out here. Is he going to have a totally different game plan? Is he going to have a totally different approach? I don't know, and I'm really excited to see that. And I forgot to pull up the line again. Petr Yan is at minus 450. Aljamain Sterling is at plus 365. I think you could argue that line is wide, but like I said, it's hard to imagine Aljamain Sterling winning a decision, and it's hard to imagine him finding a finish. So maybe it's not wide. Looking at the first fight and how closely it played out, at least at times, you know, it wasn't like Yan was blowing Sterling out of the water the entire time. I mean, Sterling was definitely having his moments where he was winning the fight. He was in the fight. It was playing out fairly closely. So looking at it that way, I can see why people are arguing that line might be a little bit wide, but it is hard for me to see Sterling winning here. Would I parlay Petr Yan at that number? Maybe. I don't know. Like, it does seem like a big number, and you're not going to get a whole lot of value added to a parlay by parlaying somebody at minus 450. So I maybe wouldn't, but I do think Petr Yan wins here. It's hard for me to see Aljamain Sterling winning. Oh, I don't know if you all watched Stat Diggers today. Brady and Wheezy talked about, I think it was, they mentioned that a parlay of Volkanovski, Yan, Chimaev, and Garry doesn't even pay plus money. You can parlay those 4 together, and you're still going to have a minus sign in front of the number. That is ridiculous. Don't play that parlay. That's a bad idea. You know how it is. There's always an apple pie shitter. One of those guys is going to lose. Volkanovski, Yan, Chimaev, Garry. One of them is going to lose, guys. That's just how it goes. I'm not even sure if I believe that, but, it tends to be how it plays out. And finally, once again, my voice is giving out on me a little bit here. We get to our main event of the evening, Alexander Volkanovski versus Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie. Crazy line on this one. We've got Alexander Volkanovski at minus 670. He's up as high as minus 800 in spots. The best return you can get on Chan Sung Jung is plus 550. That's kind of a crazy line. But again, it almost makes sense. It's probably wide, but not wide enough that I would necessarily bet Chan Sung Jung's money line. Could you argue that there's a little value on it? Maybe, but I do think Volkanovski probably wins this fight. I mean, 8 out of 10 times. I don't know if it's quite that many, but I think he wins this fight at a pretty good clip. I would describe Volkanovski a little bit like how I described Peter Yan. He's a machine. Volkanovski, and I would even argue that, his striking game is mostly where he butters his bread. And I would even argue that his striking game is, I'm trying to figure out how to describe this in a way where people aren't going to go nuts in the comments about it. His striking game is high level, but it's fairly rudimentary as far as the strikes that he uses. He doesn't do anything super crazy. It's basically like he has mastered the fundamentals is a good way to describe it. I think he's got a fairly fundamental striking game that he uses at such a high level. He is so good at making reads on his opponent. He is so good at sliding in and out of range. He is so good at getting his opponent's range and timing figured out. He is so good at his shot selection. He's like a machine. Like I said, he makes his reads on you, and then he figures out the best way to deal with you, and then he just consistently sticks to that throughout. And that's really why he's such an effective fighter, I think. Every time I think about that, I think about how I used to play poker. I used to live in Fargo, North Dakota before I moved to Vegas. I lived in Fargo for like 20 years. And I had a big group of friends there. We used to get together and play poker. And quite often, I would win. And I'm not even the best poker player. I would just... I would be patient and consistent. Because these games would end up going all night. These games would end up going till 5, 6 in the morning sometimes. And, my friends would get drunk, they would get tired, they would end up just becoming impatient and making a bad decision. Whereas I would just I'd keep my blinders on, I'd pay attention to what I'm doing, I would just stay patient, I would stay consistent, not necessarily doing anything crazy, not making any big moves, just playing it tight, playing it smart, and just doing that patiently and consistently until the end when everybody else is out and I'm raking in the chips. That's Alexander Volkanovski's game, at least in my opinion, is... He keeps it fundamental. He keeps it tight. He keeps it consistent. He stays patient. He doesn't take any big risks. He figures you out. He makes his reads. He figures out the best way to deal with you, and then he just does that consistently for 25 minutes. And that is a pretty difficult thing to beat. He also attempts more than 11 significant strikes per minute and lands more than 6, so his output is fantastic as well. Korean Zombie is... he's known, the reason he has the nickname he has is he's known for being really hittable but really tough. But he's also said that, he doesn't want to prove that moniker every time out. He understands that's not a smart way to conduct your career over time. He's like, I'm not trying to prove that I'm the zombie. I'm not trying to go out there and take those shots every time like that. Korean Zombie he's really relaxed and smooth the way he fights. But he's a guy he doesn't throw nearly as much output as Volk. He's a guy who's looking to hurt you with a big shot more so than, he doesn't have that Diaz style where he just wants to land and touch you up. Like he's looking to pick his shots, looking to land something big and hurt you more so than to try to win on volume. He's definitely a big finisher. He has 17 pro wins and only 2 of them have come by decision. One of them being his last fight against Dan Ige. So yeah, he's a finisher. He's not a guy who's going to decision all that often. But Volkanovski will almost certainly be throwing more, landing more, and winning minutes. So really, I think Korean Zombie's pretty much his only shot to win this fight is to find a finish. I don't think he's going to win minutes consistently. I don't think he's going to be able to outstrike Volkanovski significantly. I don't think he's going to be able to outland him over 25 minutes. I think that's very, very unlikely. Korean Zombie needs to either find a knockout or a submission, and he's capable of finding both. He's very good at finding both of those things. It's just those things are really hard to find against a fighter like Volkanovski. So yeah, I do lean Volkanovski to win this fight, probably by decision. I don't necessarily think he's going to be able to finish Korean Zombie. You know, maybe round 4, round 5, maybe he could find something late. I don't find it terribly likely. So by way of a pick, I will pick Volkanovski to win here. Last I looked, you could get Chan Sung Jung inside the distance at plus 700. You could also look at, you know, specifically his KO prop or submission prop. I do think if he's going to win, that's how he's going to do it. And yeah, I definitely, you know, obviously I wouldn't go heavy on anything like that, but I don't mind a sprinkle on some of those props, Chan Sung Jung inside the distance or by KO or by submission, because if he's going to win, that's how he's going to do it. I do think Volkanovski is probably the winner here, but when you can get like plus 700 on a guy like Chan Sung Jung, who is a finisher, who does tend to find finishes, that's, you know, maybe not a bad thing to look at taking a sprinkle on. All right. That's it, gang. That is the end of the card. We broke that whole thing down. Yeah, like I said, there are some fights here where I don't feel like I have a strong read. There's some fights that are lined really closely, and I agree that they should be lined closely. I really don't have much for bets on this card right now. This is the part where I, you know, after I go through the card, I go through and tell you what my bets are for the card. Partially because I don't have props yet. There's definitely some props I'm going to be looking at. But as far as bets that I've got right now, I parlayed Ian Garry when he was at minus 270. I think I parlayed him with Imavov. I can't remember for sure. I had Imavov in a parlay, and I had Duplessis in a parlay, and I lost both of those when the fights got shuffled around. So my parlay of Ian Garry ended up as a straight bet on Ian Garry, 2 units at minus 270. That line moved enough that I was able to hedge out or arb out, you know, the arbitrage. I was able to hedge out for guaranteed profit by putting 0.68 units on Darian Weeks at plus 300. Because, yeah, I ended up deciding that, like, yeah, I do favor Ian Garry to win, but I think Darian Weeks might have a better shot than the odds were giving him credit for. And since it was a situation where I was able to guarantee that little bit of profit, it was only like 0.1 unit or something like that, but I decided that you know, especially with 2 units on Ian Garry at minus 270, even if Ian Garry did win, I wasn't going to collect a whole lot anyway. I was going to collect like less than a unit anyway, so I decided to just go for it. Maybe people think that that's the coward's way out. That's just fine. I will take the coward's way out and guarantee a small amount of profit almost every time if I've got that option. So, and then I did put 1.5 units on Kelvin Gastelum at minus 150, but that fight has now been canceled. It's still showing on my Bet MMA Tips record, but that will be taken off, I imagine. And then I parlayed Jan with either Imavov or Duplessis, I forget which one, and he was at minus 440. When I put that parlay together, I put 1 unit on that, so now that is turned into a straight bet as well. So all I've got is the Garry Weeks, but that's canceled out. My Gastelum bet is gone, and I've got 1 unit on Jan at minus 440. That's all I've got right now. You know, if you followed me for a while, you know that my style is usually to make these little 2-fight parlays, and sometimes 2-fighter parlays, sometimes 3-fighter parlays. That's kind of my main way that I win units, is those parlays, and I just didn't really like much on this card. You know, like those top 3 fights, the numbers are just crazy. Like, I don't like the idea of parlaying Alexander Volkanovski at like minus 700, minus 800. I did put Jan in that one at minus 440. I didn't feel great about that anyway. You know, so, and like, I don't like the idea of Ian Garry at minus 350. I don't like the idea of Khamzat at minus 550. Like, there just weren't really numbers here that I was comfortable parlaying, so I kind of stayed away from doing that too. There are some, you know, I was potentially thinking about parlaying Raquel Pennington, but like I said, the late notice kind of got to me there. But so I may end up putting together 1 2-fight parlay here still. There, you know, I'm still potentially keeping an eye on that. There are some props that I will probably play once they drop on Bet Online, but I think you can expect that this is going to be a really small card for me betting wise. There just isn't much that I like here. And I try really hard not to force things. I mean, I have had a lot of success. I've won 65 units at 25% ROI in 5 months, which is pretty good, I think. And part of the reason that I've done well is I try to be really careful. I was raised to be very frugal. My parents are people that don't spend money. I was raised to be one of those people as well. So the idea of losing money doesn't sit well with me. And that's why I try to bet really, really carefully and really, really frugally. Like I said, that's why I arbed out on that Garry Weeks situation, is I'm like, if I can guarantee a little bit of profit, I'll take it, because I'm frugal like that. I'm cheap like that. So yeah, I'm not going to be looking to force anything. I may throw a couple more props in there, but that might be all I end up having for this card. So anyway, that is it, gang. We have made it to the end. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this video if you watched the whole time. I will... Last card, I came up with a new show that I'm calling Big Money Bets, where I go through and talk about some props and parlays. I will put that show out later this week. I might even do it tomorrow. Well, I'll wait till the props drop so I can figure out what I'm doing. But in the next couple days here, I'll probably put that show out. That's just a short little 10 or 15 minute video where I just go through a few things. But thank you so much for watching. If you haven't yet, make sure to throw a like on this. I'm trying to point here. Throw a like down there. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Also, if you can leave me a comment, doesn't even matter what it is. Obviously, all that stuff makes a difference with getting the algorithms going and helping me to get more eyes on my channel and get more subscribers and that sort of thing. If you're not yet following me on Twitter, you can find me there at Eric Bets Fights. You can also find me on Instagram at Eric_Bets_Fights. That's all I've got for you for this week's video, folks. As always, I am Eric with Eric Bets Fights, reminding you to play it smart, play it tight. Let's grow those bankrolls. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you enjoy this weekend's fights, and I'll see you next time.